My life was a carefully constructed lie, built on guilt, and sustained by a manipulation so dark it makes my stomach turn just thinking about it. For 6 long years, I was not a husband. I was a nurse, a servant, and a punching bag for a woman I thought was paralyzed because of me. I sold my company, I lost my friends, and I gave up my dignity to care for Patricia. I thought I was doing penance. I did not know I was actually starring in a horror movie directed by the person I slept next to every night. When the doctor locked that hospital room door and told me to call the police on my own wife, I thought he had lost his mind. But what he showed me on those X-rays did not just break my heart. It made me realize that the devil does not live in hell. She lives in my master bedroom. Before I tell you how I destroyed her perfect little scheme, let me know in the comments if you have ever sacrificed everything for someone who ended up betraying you. Hit that subscribe button if you believe the truth always comes out in the end. The automatic doors of St. Jude Hospital hissed open, but the sound was instantly drowned out by Patricia screaming. It was a high-pitched, blood-curdling shriek that made every head in the waiting room snap toward us. I was running alongside the gurney, my hand gripping hers, sweat stinging my eyes. She was thrashing around, putting on a performance worthy of an Academy Award, though I did not know it at the time. "You clumsy idiot!" she screamed, her nails digging into my wrist, hard enough to draw blood. "You did this on purpose. You are trying to finish the job." "Are you not?" I kept mumbling. "Apologies," my head bowed low. "I am so sorry, Patty. I am so sorry." The wheel of the chair just caught the curb. "I tried to catch you." Her voice cut through the sterile air like a knife. "You tried. You are useless, Bill. 6 years in this chair and you still cannot push it properly. God. Why didn't you just let me die in that car crash?" Those words hit me harder than any physical blow. The guilt was my constant companion, a heavy gray coat I wore even in the summer. I felt the judgment of the nurses and the other patients burning into my back. They saw a frazzled, aging man in cheap clothes failing to care for his disabled wife. They did not see the former architect who used to design skylines. They only saw a failure. We rushed her into Trauma Room 3. The smell of rubbing alcohol and latex filled my nose, a scent I had grown to hate over the last half-decade. Dr. Adrian Kovic was the attending physician on duty. He was a sharp man, efficient and no-nonsense. He ordered the nurses to stabilize her and get her into a gown for X-rays. Patricia was sobbing now, playing the victim perfectly, whimpering about shooting pains in her lower back and legs. "Please, doctor," she cried, clutching Kovic's arm. "My husband, he is getting old. He is not strong enough to handle me anymore. Maybe it is time I go to a state facility." He just dropped me on the concrete. I stood in the corner, crushing my old baseball cap in my hands, feeling like the smallest man in the world. I waited for the verdict. I waited for the doctor to scold me for being negligent. Dr. Kovic finished his examination. He checked her spine, her hips, and then spent a long time looking at her feet and calves. He frowned, his brow furrowing in confusion. He looked at the monitors, then back at Patricia, who was still sobbing into her pillow. Suddenly, Dr. Kovic stood up straight. His demeanor changed instantly. He turned to the head nurse and spoke in a voice that left no room for argument. "Leave us. Everyone out. Now." The nurses looked confused but obeyed, scurrying out into the hallway. The room went silent except for the beeping of the heart monitor. My heart hammered against my ribs. Was she dying? Was it internal bleeding, doctor? Kovic walked over to the door. I watched confused as he clicked the heavy lock shut. The metallic click echoed in the small room. He turned to me, and the look in his eyes was not anger. It was fear. Pure, urgent intensity. He stepped close to me, invading my personal space, and lowered his voice to a whisper that chilled my blood. "Mr. Foster, listen to me very carefully. You need to keep your face neutral. Do not look at her." I stammered, confused. "What, is she okay?" Kovic gripped my shoulder, his fingers digging in. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out his phone and shoved it into my hand. keeping it below the line of sight of the bed. "Call 911. He hissed, his voice barely audible. "Call them right now. Tell them you are at the hospital and you need officers here immediately. Do not let your wife know what you are doing." "Why?" I whispered back, my voice trembling. "Doctor, what is going on?" He looked over his shoulder at Patricia, then back at me, his eyes wide with a terrifying realization. Because Mr. Foster, I just felt her leg muscles spasm when I tested her reflexes. And looking at the muscle density in her calves, there is no medical way that woman has been paralyzed for 6 years. She can walk, Bill. She has been able to walk this whole time. My thumb hovered over the call button, and I felt like a traitor in my own life. I whispered into the receiver, my voice cracking, repeating exactly what Dr. Kovic had ordered. "I need police at St. Jude Hospital Trauma Room 3. Immediately." I hung up before the dispatcher could ask why, shoving the phone back into my pocket, just as Patricia groaned on the bed. For the next 5 minutes, the silence in that room was heavier than lead. I stood in the corner, pressing my back against the cold wall, terrified to look at the woman I had bathed, fed, and carried for 6 years. Every time she shifted on the gurney, I flinched. I was convinced she knew. I was convinced she could smell my fear. Then came the sirens. They started as a distant wail and grew louder until they were right outside the emergency bay, drowning out the steady beep of the heart monitor. Blue and red lights flashed against the drawn blinds, painting the room in a chaotic rhythm. When the door handle turned, my heart stopped. 2 officers stepped in, their hands resting near their belts, their faces serious. Officer Miller, a man I recognized from the local precinct, scanned the room. In that split second, my mind went to the darkest possible place. I thought they were coming for me. I was sure Dr. Kovic had seen bruises on Patricia's arms from when I tried to catch her fall, and he had assumed I was abusing her. It made perfect sense. For years, Patricia had been planting those seeds. She would tell the neighbors I was drinking too much. She would sigh loudly when the mailman came apologizing for my temper, even though I had never raised a hand to her in my life. I looked at the handcuffs on Officer Miller's belt, and I could already feel the cold steel on my wrists. I was ready to surrender. I was ready to apologize for a crime I did not commit just to make the nightmare stop. But before I could speak, Patricia saw the uniforms. Her reaction was instantaneous and terrifyingly calculated. She did not look confused. She did not look scared. She looked like a martyr. She pulled the thin hospital blanket up to her chin, making herself look smaller, frailer. Tears welled up in her eyes on command, spilling over her cheeks as she looked from the police to me. "Officers, please," she sobbed, her voice trembling with a perfect mix of pain and forgiveness. "Please do not be hard on him. My husband, he did not mean to do it. He is just getting so forgetful lately. The wheelchair is heavy, and he is not as strong as he used to be." She looked at Officer Miller with pleading eyes. "I told him the curb was uneven, but he was rushing. He is always rushing. But I am fine, really. I can take a little pain. I am used to suffering. Just please do not arrest him for being clumsy." I stood there paralyzed by her words. She was defending me, but every word was a dagger. She was painting a picture of a senile, incompetent husband who was a danger to his invalid wife. She was confirming their suspicions before they even had NC. I wanted to scream. I wanted to yell that the wheelchair did not tip over, that she had thrown her weight to the side on purpose. But my throat was dry. I looked at Dr. Kovic, begging him with my eyes to stop this charade. "Why did you make me call them?" I thought. "You just handed her the perfect audience." I felt like I was drowning in plain sight, and the only person who had a life raft was the doctor standing silently by the X-ray light box. Officer Miller was reaching for the handcuffs at his belt when Dr. Kovic stepped between us. His voice was low, but it cracked through the room like a whip. "Before anyone writes a report or makes an arrest, I need you to see something. Officer, Bring Mr. Foster. It is not a request." Without waiting for an answer, the doctor turned and marched toward the imaging room down the hall. The police exchanged a confused look, but the authority in Kovic's voice was impossible to ignore. They grabbed my arm not gently and steered me out of the trauma room, leaving Patricia alone with her fake tears. The viewing room was dark, illuminated only by the stark white glow of the light boxes lining the wall. Dr. Kovic did not waste a second. He slapped a large film onto the viewer with a loud snap that made me jump. He pointed a pen at the image of 2 leg bones encased in thick, dark shadow. "Gentlemen, look at this. I want you to look closely." I squinted at the gray shapes, my mind too foggy to understand what I was seeing. Dr. Kovic tapped the screen aggressively. "This is the MRI and X-ray of the patient's lower body taken 10 minutes ago. Now, Mr. Foster, tell the officers how long your wife has been paralyzed." 6 years, I whispered, my voice trembling. "Since the accident in 2018. She has not felt her legs since then." Dr. Kovic turned to the officers. "Medical science is very clear on one thing. If you do not use it, you lose it. It is called atrophy. After 6 years of being confined to a wheelchair, the muscles in the calves and thighs should be wasted away. They should be thin, weak, and barely visible on a scan like this. But look here." He circled a dense, dark area on the film. "These are the gastrocnemius muscles. They are not atrophied. They are rock hard. They are dense. These are not the legs of a paraplegic woman. These are the legs of someone who runs, someone who squats, someone who is physically active every single day." The room began to spin. I grabbed the edge of the desk to keep from falling. "What are you saying?" Asked, though deep down the sickness in my gut told me I already knew. Dr. Kovic was not done. He moved his pen down to the feet on the scan. "And this is the smoking gun. Look at the bone structure here at the metatarsals and the thickening of the skin at the heel and the ball of the foot. These are fresh calluses, heavy ones, the kind you get from putting extreme pressure on the front of your foot for hours at a time." Officer Miller stepped closer, peering at the image. "What causes that, Doc?" Dr. Kovic looked straight at me and his eyes were full of pity. "Stilettos, high heels, dancing, running, walking, everything except sitting in a wheelchair. Mr. Foster, your wife is not paralyzed. She has never been paralyzed. Her spinal cord is perfectly intact. The air left my lungs in a rush. I fell into the nearest chair because my own legs suddenly refused to hold me up. Images from the last 6 years flooded my brain like a slideshow from hell. I saw myself carrying her up the stairs, my back screaming in pain, while she clung to my neck, whispering that she was a burden. I saw myself working double shifts at the construction site, my hands bleeding and blistered to pay for her special nerve medication. I remembered the nights I sat by her bed massaging those very legs while she moaned in fake agony, telling me how much she missed walking. She felt it. Every time I touched her, she felt it. Every time I bathed her, she was laughing inside. Every time I cried, apologizing for the accident that took her legs, she was mocking me. I sold my mother's engagement ring to buy her that lightweight titanium wheelchair. I gave up my architecture firm because she said she needed full-time care. I destroyed my life to serve a lie. The realization was not just painful, it was violent. It felt like someone had reached into my chest and ripped out my heart. I looked up at the X-ray again, and the dense muscle on that screen mocked me. That was not a medical image anymore. It was a picture of my stupidity. It was proof that while I was dying inside to save her, she was literally running circles around me. Officer Miller looked at me, and his hand moved away from his belt. He took his cap off and ran a hand through his hair. Jesus, if this is true, then that performance back in the trauma room. She is a con artist, Dr. Kovic said, putting the file down. And she is dangerous. But now we have the proof. The question is, Mr. Foster, what do you want to do? I sat there staring at the glowing bones of the woman I thought I loved. The sadness was evaporating, replaced by a cold, hard rage I had never felt before. I stood up, and for the first time in 6 years, my back felt straight. I wiped the tears from my face. "I do not want to arrest her yet," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "Not yet. She took 6 years of my life. I want to see how far she is willing to go. Take me back to the room. I have a performance of my own to give." The silence in the viewing room was suffocating, but my mind was loud. It dragged me back to that rainy Tuesday night in November 2018. The night my life actually ended, even though my heart kept beating. We were driving home from a dinner party. The rain was coming down in sheets, hammering against the roof of our SUV like bullets. I remember the wipers slapping back and forth, unable to keep up with the deluge. Patricia was in the passenger seat complaining about my driving speed, even though I was going 10 miles under the limit. She told me I was incompetent. She told me I was ruining the suspension. Then the world tilted. I hit the brakes as we approached the curve near Miller's Ravine, but the pedal went all the way to the floor. There was no resistance, just a sickening emptiness under my foot. The car hydroplaned, spinning wildly out of control. I remember the sound of metal screaming against the guardrail, sparks flying in the dark, and then the stomach-churning sensation of freefall. We rolled twice before crashing into the ravine floor. The impact was deafening, followed by an even more terrifying silence. I woke up tasting blood. My airbag had deployed, saving me with just a few cracked ribs and a concussion. I turned to look at Patricia. She was slumped forward, her legs pinned under the crushed dashboard. I scrambled out of the broken window, ignoring the pain in my chest, and ran to her side. I tried to pull the door open, screaming her name, but the metal was twisted shut. When she finally opened her eyes, they were not filled with fear. They were filled with hate. "You did this," she hissed through gritted teeth. Her voice was low and venomous, even over the sound of the rain. "You were driving too fast. You did this to me." At the hospital hours later, the doctors gave us the news. They said there was severe trauma to her spinal column. They used words like compression and nerve damage. They said it was unlikely she would ever walk again. I stood by her bedside, my clothes still muddy and blood-stained, waiting for her to look at me. When she finally did, she delivered the sentence that would enslave me for the next 6 years. "You destroyed my life, Bill. You took my legs. You took my freedom. You owe me everything now." I believed her. I let that guilt burrow into my soul like a parasite. I did not question the brake failure. I did not question the road conditions. I only saw my wife in a wheelchair, and I saw myself as the monster who put her there. From that moment on, I ceased to be William Foster, the successful architect. I became William Foster, the servant. I stopped living for myself. Every breath I took was an apology. Every dollar I earned was penance. I spent every waking moment trying to pay back a debt that she had just fabricated out of thin air. And standing there in the dark with Dr. Kovic staring at the proof of her deception, I realized that the accident did not break her legs. It just gave her the perfect excuse to break me. The guilt was a hungry beast, and it demanded to be fed with money. The doctors told us that Patricia's case was complex, that her spinal trauma required specialized care that standard insurance would barely touch. I did not hesitate. I did not ask for a second opinion or look for cheaper alternatives. I simply opened my veins and let the finances bleed out, because I believed it was the only way to save her. Foster and Associates was not just a company. It was my legacy. I had spent 20 years building that architecture firm from a basement office into a premier design studio in the city. But 3 months after the accident, when the first round of hospital bills arrived, totaling over $45,000, I panicked. I called my biggest competitor, a man named Gregson, who had been trying to buy me out for years. I sold my life's work for pennies on the dollar. I did not negotiate. I did not read the fine print. I just took the check and handed the keys to the kingdom over to a man who did not have half my talent. I told myself it was just a business. I told myself Patricia was more important than buildings. But the money from the firm was just a bandage on a bullet wound. Patricia demanded the best. She needed a specialized nerve specialist in Switzerland. She needed a customized van with a hydraulic lift that cost $60,000. She needed organic meals prepared by a nutritionist because her digestion was supposedly compromised by the paralysis. The bank accounts started draining faster than I could fill them. Then came the day I had to sell the house, our sanctuary on Lake George. It was a sprawling 4-bedroom estate with a private dock where we used to drink wine and watch the sunset. It was appraised at over $1.2 million, but the market was soft, and I was desperate for cash. I let it go for $800,000. I remember standing in the empty living room, the echo of my footsteps mocking me as I signed the deed. I traded our paradise for a cramped ground-floor apartment next to a noisy highway because it was wheelchair accessible. The $800,000 went into a joint account, and within 2 years, it had evaporated into the black hole of her medical expenses. When the savings hit zero, I could not go back to architecture. The industry moves too fast, and I had been out of the loop for too long caring for her. Plus, I needed immediate cash, not invoices that would be paid in 90 days. So at 53 years old, the man who used to design skyscrapers put on a pair of steel-toed boots and walked onto a construction site. I went from holding a drafting pencil to hauling 80-pound bags of cement. I went from signing contracts to scrubbing grout off tiles. My hands, once the smooth hands of an artist, became unrecognizable. They cracked and bled. My fingernails were perpetually black with grease and drywall dust. I worked 16-hour shifts, taking every overtime slot available, coming home with a back that felt like it was going to snap in half. I was humiliated every single day. Former colleagues would walk by the site in their suits, and I would pull my cap down low, praying they would not recognize the laborer sweating in the dirt. But I swallowed my pride. I swallowed the pain. Because every time I came home and saw Patricia sitting in that chair, looking helpless and fragile, I told myself this was my punishment. I was buying her comfort with my sweat. I did not know I was just funding her secret savings account while she laughed at the fool covered in dust. My shift at the construction site ended at 5 in the afternoon, but my shift as a nurse and a servant never ended. There were no weekends off. There were no sick days. The moment I walked through the door, covered in drywall dust and exhaustion, the real work began. The most humiliating part of my day was not scrubbing toilets at the job site. It was coming home to lift my wife out of her chair and carry her to the bathroom. She was not a small woman, but whenever I lifted her, she made herself dead weight. She would let her arms hang limp and her head roll back, forcing me to strain every muscle in my back to keep us both from falling. I remember apologizing to her as I struggled to lower her onto the toilet seat, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I remember her sighing with annoyance, telling me to be more gentle. Now I know she was doing it on purpose. She was engaging her core muscles to make herself heavier. She was fighting my lift subtly just to watch me struggle. But the bathroom was not the worst part. The worst part was the hygiene. There were days she claimed she was too weak to even make it to the toilet, so she would soil herself in the chair. I would have to clean her. I would have to wipe the body of a grown woman who was perfectly capable of doing it herself. I would have to change adult diapers while she lay there watching television, completely detached from the degradation she was forcing on me. I washed her body with warm washcloths, careful not to scrub too hard on her legs, because she said her nerve endings were hypersensitive. I treated those legs like porcelain dolls, not knowing they were strong enough to run a marathon. Then there was the bell. That small silver bell on her nightstand is the sound that still haunts my nightmares. She knew I had to wake up at 4 in the morning to catch the bus to the construction site, but that did not stop her from ringing it at 2 and again at 3. I would jolt awake, my heart pounding, thinking there was an emergency. I would rush to her side only to find her glaring at me in the dark. "My water is warm," she would say. "Get me fresh ice." Or she would complain that the blanket was too heavy or the pillow was too flat. It was sleep deprivation, pure and simple. It was torture. She used those sleepless hours to tear apart whatever self-esteem I had left. While I stood there in my underwear, shivering and pouring her water, she would look at my calloused hands and shake her head in disgust. "Look at you, Bill," she would say. "You used to be someone. You used to design skylines. Now look at you. You are just a laborer." She would bring up my old business partner, Gregson, the man who bought my firm. She would tell me she saw on social media that Gregson just bought a yacht or a vacation home in Tuscany. "Why can you not provide for me like that anymore?" she would ask, knowing full well that I sold everything to pay for her medical bills. She compared me to every successful man we knew, chipping away at my manhood, night after night, until I felt like I deserved to be her servant. I was so tired, so broken, that I started to believe her. I thought I was useless. I did not know I was the only thing keeping her parasitic lifestyle alive. Then came Todd. If the financial ruin was the slow-burning fire that destroyed my security, Todd was the gasoline that eventually burned down my marriage. Patricia insisted she needed a specialist, someone with new cutting-edge techniques to stimulate her dormant nerves. That specialist was a 35-year-old personal trainer named Todd, who charged $200 an hour, cash only. He did not look like a doctor. He looked like a fitness model who had just walked off a magazine cover. He drove a bright red sports car that he parked aggressively in my driveway, often blocking my rusted truck, a subtle power move that I was too exhausted to challenge. Todd treated me with a disdain that was almost impressive in its audacity. To him, I was not the homeowner or the husband. I was the help. I was the old, tired man who smelled like sawdust and sweat, while he smelled of expensive cologne and hair gel. The first time he arrived, I reached out to shake his hand, trying to be welcoming. He looked at my calloused, rough hand, then at my face, and didn't even raise his arm. He just smirked and walked past me straight into the bedroom as if he owned the place. "You need to clear out, Bill," he would say, not even looking at me. "Patricia needs absolute focus. Your negative energy is blocking her chi. You are stressing her muscles just by being here. Go take a walk or something." Patricia would nod in agreement from the bed, looking at him with wide, trusting eyes. "Please, Bill," she would say. "Todd knows what he is doing. Just give us an hour. I need to concentrate on the pain." So I was evicted from my own master bedroom. 3 times a week for $200 an hour, I was kicked out of my house. I would go sit on the back porch sometimes in the freezing cold or the humid heat, waiting for the session to end. I would sit on a plastic chair staring at the overgrown grass. I was too tired to mow, and I would listen. The walls of our apartment were thin, and I could hear everything. I heard the rhythmic creaking of the bed frame. I heard Patricia's voice. At the time, my naive, guilt-ridden brain interpreted those sounds as the agonizing cries of physical therapy. I heard her moan deep and loud. I heard her shout, "God! Todd, that is deep." I heard her panting, begging him to stop, then begging him to keep going. I sat there, gripping the armrests of my plastic chair, tears stinging my eyes. I thought, look at how much she is suffering to walk again. Look at how brave she is. I thought the rhythmic thumping was Todd performing some kind of percussive massage on her atrophied muscles. I wanted to rush in and hold her hand to tell her it would be okay, but I stayed put, because I didn't want to ruin her progress. I sat outside like a faithful dog guarding the door, while a stranger was inside doing things to my wife that I paid for with my blood and sweat. I remember one specific afternoon. It was raining, and I was huddled under the small awning of the porch. The sounds from the bedroom were particularly intense. Patricia let out a scream that sounded almost like ecstasy, followed by a long, guttural moan. My heart broke for her. I thought the nerve stimulation must be excruciating. When Todd finally came out 40 minutes later, he was sweating, his hair slightly messed up, looking flushed. "Good session," he said, tucking his shirt into his pants as he walked past me. "We really broke through some barriers today. She is exhausted. Do not disturb her." I thanked him. I actually thanked him. I reached into my wallet and handed him 6 $50 bills because he had stayed an extra half hour. He took the money without a thank you, hopped into his sports car, and sped away. I went inside to check on Patricia, and she was lying under the covers, her face flushed, looking peaceful. I kissed her forehead and told her I was proud of her hard work. She smiled at me, a smile I now recognize as pure duplicity, and said, "Thank you, Bill. Todd is a miracle worker. You have no idea how good he makes me feel." She was right. I had no idea. I was the architect who could design complex structures, but I couldn't see the blueprint of betrayal that was being drawn right in front of my face. I was financing my own humiliation hour by expensive hour. Officer Miller's words echoed in my head like a death sentence. "We cannot arrest her tonight, Mr. Foster. We need the paper trail. We need to nail her for the insurance fraud, the charity theft, and the conspiracy. If we take her in now, she posts bail and disappears. You have to take her home. You have to act normal. Act normal." The police officer might as well have asked me to fly without wings. How do you act normal when you know the person sitting next to you is a sociopath who has been sucking the life out of you for 6 years? The drive back to our cramped apartment was the longest journey of my life. Patricia sat in the passenger seat, clutching a tissue, dabbing at dry eyes. She was already rewriting the narrative in her head, rehearsing the lies she would tell the neighbors about my clumsiness. I gripped the steering wheel so hard, my knuckles turned white, terrified that if I let go, I might actually crash the car on purpose just to end this nightmare. Every time she sighed or shifted in her seat, my skin crawled. I felt like I was trapped in a cage with a venomous snake, but I was the one who had to keep it warm. When we pulled into the driveway, the rain had started again, a grim reminder of the accident that started this hell. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, staring at the windshield wipers. I had to gather every ounce of strength I had left not to scream. I walked around to her side and opened the door. She looked up at me with those big, innocent eyes that used to melt my heart. Now they just looked like black holes where my happiness went to die. "Oh, Bill," she whimpered, reaching out her arms like a child. "My back is killing me. The doctors were so rough. I do not think I can even transfer to the chair. You have to carry me. Please, baby, just carry me upstairs to bed." Upstairs. She knew exactly what she was asking. Our bedroom was on the second floor because she insisted the air was better up there. For years, I had destroyed my own spine, lugging her dead weight up those stairs twice a day. I forced a smile that felt like a grimace. "Of course, honey," I said. My voice sounded hollow, robotic. I slid my arms under her knees and behind her back. As I lifted her, I felt it again. The tension. The resistance. She was not limp. She was holding her core tight, making herself heavier, shifting her center of gravity to make me struggle. It was a subtle torture, a physical dominance she exerted over me while pretending to be helpless. I could smell her perfume, the lavender scent I used to associate with comfort. Now it smelled like deception. Her hair brushed against my cheek, and I had to fight the urge to drop her right there on the wet pavement. I hated her. I hated her with a clarity that was almost blinding. But I held on. I marched up those stairs, one agonizing step at a time, playing the role of the devoted mule. I grunted with the effort, and she whispered thank you, acting as if she was doing me a favor by letting me serve her. I laid her down on the bed where she had betrayed me with Todd, the bed bought with my sweat, and I tucked her in. "Sleep tight," I whispered, and I meant it, because while she slept, I was going to start digging her grave. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth when I kissed her forehead that evening. I told Patricia I picked up an emergency double shift at the site because we needed the money for her new medication. She did not even look up from her magazine, just waved a dismissive hand and told me to try not to wake her when I came back. I walked out to my truck, my tool belt heavy on my waist, but instead of driving to the city, I drove 3 blocks down and parked in the shadow of an old oak tree. I waited there for 3 agonizing hours, watching the lights in my own house turn off one by one until the windows were black squares against the night sky. I was about to become a burglar in my own home. I slipped through the back door, thankful that I had greased the hinges with WD-40 2 days prior. The house was silent save for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I was terrified the sound would wake her up. I felt like a criminal violating the sanctity of my own marriage, but I reminded myself that the sanctity had been destroyed long ago. I started in the living room. I pulled a small step stool from the closet, moving in slow motion. My hands, usually steady enough to draft blueprints, were shaking as I unscrewed the casing of the smoke detector on the ceiling. I installed the first microcamera there. It was a tiny device no bigger than a button, with a wide-angle lens that covered the entire room and the hallway leading to the stairs. I wired it into the detector's power supply so it would never run out of battery. Every turn of the screwdriver felt deafening in the silence. I kept pausing, holding my breath, straining my ears for the sound of that silver bell from upstairs. If she rang it now, if she caught me standing on a stool at 2 a.m, the game would be over. Then came the hardest part. The master bedroom. I crept up the stairs, skipping the 3rd step, because I knew it creaked. The door was slightly ajar. I could hear the soft, rhythmic breathing of the woman who had ruined my life. I slipped inside, the darkness pressing against my eyes. I navigated by memory, moving toward the dresser, where a collection of stuffed animals sat. I picked up the vintage brown teddy bear I had bought her for our 10th anniversary. The irony was not lost on me. I took the bear into the hallway bathroom, closing the door softly before turning on the dimmest light. With a razor blade, I carefully sliced open the seam on the bear's chest. I embedded the second camera inside, positioning the lens behind the bear's plastic button eye. I sewed it back up with trembling fingers, praying my clumsy stitching would not look obvious. I rushed back into the bedroom and placed the bear back on the shelf, angling it perfectly so it faced the bed. The bed where I slept. The bed where she slept. The bed where I suspected she was bringing another man. I retreated to the kitchen to sync the system. I pulled out my phone and opened the hidden app. My thumb hovered over the connect button. When the screen flickered to life, my breath caught in my throat. There it was, a grainy black and white live feed of my living room. I swiped left, and there was my bedroom. I could see the lump under the covers that was Patricia. I could see the empty space beside her where I should have been. The technology was working perfectly. I was now the all-seeing eye in my own personal hell. I slipped out the back door just as the sun began to paint the sky gray, feeling a strange mixture of nausea and power. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait for the rats to come out. I parked my truck 3 streets away under the cover of a flickering street lamp. My hands were trembling so hard I almost dropped the phone between the seats. The glow of the screen was the only light in the cab, illuminating my face, which was already slick with cold sweat. I opened the app. The connection loaded, and there it was, my bedroom. In grainy black and white night vision, I saw the lump under the duvet that was my wife. I saw the teddy bear sitting on the dresser, its plastic eye hiding the lens that was about to decide my future. I watched the timestamp on the screen. It was only 2 minutes after I had left the house. For a moment, nothing happened. Patricia lay still, looking for all the world like the fragile, broken woman I had devoted my life to protecting. Part of me, the foolish part that still loved her, prayed that she would stay there. I prayed that Dr. Kovic was wrong, that the X-rays were a mistake, and that I was just a paranoid old man spying on his invalid wife. Then the duvet moved. It did not move slowly or with difficulty. Patricia threw the covers off with a sharp, energetic motion. She sat up on the edge of the bed. There was no grimace of pain. There was no reaching for the wheelchair that stood beside the nightstand. She simply swung her legs over the side, placed her bare feet on the carpet, and stood up. I stopped breathing. My brain could not process the visual data. For 6 years, I had believed those legs were dead weight. I had massaged them, bathed them, and lifted them. Now I was watching her stretch her arms above her head, twisting her torso left and right with the flexibility of a gymnast. She walked across the room. She did not limp. She did not shuffle. She walked with a confident, predatory stride. I switched the camera feed to the living room smoke detector. A few seconds later, she walked into the frame. She was wearing her silk nightgown. The expensive one, she claimed, scratched her sensitive skin. She walked straight to the wine cabinet. I watched her reach up to the top shelf, a movement she swore was impossible for her, and pull down a bottle of vintage Merlot. This was a bottle I had been saving for a special occasion, one I thought we would never celebrate. She popped the cork with ease, poured a generous glass, and took a long, satisfied sip. Then my heart shattered completely. Buster, my 12-year-old golden retriever, heard the noise and came trotting out from the laundry room. He was the only other living thing in that house that showed me any affection. He walked up to Patricia, his tail wagging low, probably confused to see her standing. He nuzzled her leg, looking for a pat. Patricia did not pet him. She did not speak to him. Without even looking down, she pulled her right leg back and kicked him. It was a sharp, vicious kick to his ribs. Buster yelped a sound that pierced through the tiny speaker on my phone and went straight into my soul and scrambled away, cowering under the dining table. "Stupid mutt," she sneered, taking another sip of wine. "Get away from me. You smell like Bill." I sat in my truck, a silent scream trapped in my throat. I wanted to punch the dashboard. I wanted to drive the truck through the front door. Seeing her stand was a shock. But seeing her hurt my dog, seeing the casual cruelty she hid behind her mask of victimhood, that was the moment the husband died and the avenger was born. She was not just a liar. She was a monster. And she was drinking my wine, celebrating her deception, while I sat in the dark, finally seeing the devil for who she really was. I watched the screen of my phone as the front door opened and Todd walked in. He did not knock. He did not carry the heavy medical bag filled with weights and resistance bands that he usually made a show of lugging around. He walked in with a swagger, holding a bottle of champagne. The man I had paid thousands of dollars to rehabilitate my wife was not there to work. He was there to celebrate. As soon as the door clicked shut, the woman who supposedly needed a hydraulic lift to get into the shower ran across the living room. She literally ran. She jumped into his arms, wrapping those paralyzed legs around his waist with the strength of an acrobat. I felt bile rise in my throat. I had spent years carrying her like a fragile porcelain doll, terrified that one wrong move would shatter her spine. And here she was, clinging to this man like a teenager in love, completely supporting her own weight. They moved to the bedroom. My bedroom. I watched on the small screen as they collapsed onto the mattress where I slept every night. It was a violation so profound that I felt physical pain in my chest. This was the bed I had paid for by scrubbing floors and hauling cement. This was the sanctuary where I had held her hand through her night terrors, whispering that everything would be okay. Now it was just a stage for their affair. I turned the volume up on my phone, pressing the speaker against my ear. The audio from the hidden camera inside the teddy bear was tinny but crystal clear. There were no sounds of physical therapy. There were no grunts of exertion from rehabilitation exercises. There was only laughter. Cruel, mocking laughter. Todd rolled over, grabbing a glass of the wine Patricia had poured earlier. He looked at her with a smirk that made my blood boil. God, you are tense, he said, running a hand through her hair. It is, Bill, Patricia replied, her voice dripping with annoyance. He is suffocating me. He is always hovering, always asking if I am okay, always apologizing. It is exhausting pretending to be helpless all the time. My legs actually hurt from sitting still so much, just to keep up the act. Todd laughed again, a cold, sharp sound. Do not worry about him, baby. He is just the wallet. He is the necessary evil. Then he delivered the line that turned my sadness into a cold, hard block of ice. He leaned in close to her, swirling the wine in his glass. That old man is so stupid, Todd said. It is honestly pathetic how easily he buys it. Tell me, is he close to cracking? Is he going to sell that last plot of land his parents left him? I'm getting tired of waiting. I want to know if he is ready to fund our little Swiss getaway. Patricia giggled, tracing a finger down his chest. He is meeting with the realtor on Monday. He thinks the money is for a revolutionary spinal surgery in Zurich. He has no idea he is paying for our new life in Mexico. Once the money hits the account, we are gone. And he will be left with nothing but a goodbye note. I sat in my truck staring at the dashboard. My parents' land. The 10 acres in Montana that my father had bought with his army pension. It was the only legacy I had left, the only thing I hadn't sold to feed Patricia's bottomless greed. They weren't just stealing my money. They were planning to liquidate my family history to fund their retirement on a beach. The surgery was a lie. The therapy was a lie. My entire life was a lie. I watched them toast to my destruction, clinking glasses over the grave of my dignity. But as I sat there in the dark, gripping my phone until my fingers went numb, I realized something. They thought the game was over. They thought they had already won. They had no idea that the old stupid man was watching, and he was about to rewrite the ending of their story. I thought I had heard the worst of it. I thought watching my wife cheat on me with the man I paid to heal her was the ultimate betrayal. I was wrong. As I sat in the dark cab of my truck clutching the phone until my knuckles turned white, the conversation in my bedroom shifted from adultery to something far more sinister. It shifted to murder. Todd's voice came through the speaker, sounding impatient. He was pacing around the room now. I could hear his footsteps on the hardwood floor. 200,000 is a nice start, Patty, but let's be real. It is not enough for the lifestyle we want in Cabo. That money will last us 2 years, maybe 3, if we are careful. And you know I am not good at being careful. I watched Patricia on the screen. She was leaning back against the headboard, swirling her wine, a terrifyingly calm smile playing on her lips. She looked like a predator toying with her food. Don't worry, baby, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The 200,000 from the land sale is just our travel money. It is just to get us set up. The real payday comes a little later. Todd stopped pacing. What do you mean? Patricia took a slow sip of wine. You know Bill has a life insurance policy, right? A big one. He took it out 10 years ago when his firm was at its peak. Even when we were broke, even when we had to sell the lake house, I made sure he paid those premiums every single month. I told him it was irresponsible to leave me unprotected given my condition. I stopped breathing. I remembered those payments. There were months when I skipped lunch, months when I wore shoes with holes in the soles, just so I could send that check to the insurance company. I thought I was protecting her future. How much? Todd asked, his voice greedy. $1 million, Patricia said, plus double indemnity for accidental death. Todd let out a low whistle. $1 million. But he is healthy as a horse, Patty. That old man is going to live another 20 years. Patricia laughed, a cold, dry sound that rattled my bones. Not necessarily. He works on a construction site now, Todd. It is a dangerous environment. Accidents happen all the time. Scaffolding collapses. Heavy loads drop. People slip from high places. It would be so tragic, wouldn't it? The poor devoted husband working himself to death for his invalid wife only to have a terrible fall. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. The air in the truck felt suddenly thin. She was not just planning to leave me. She was planning to kill me. She was going to stage a workplace accident. Todd hesitated for a second. "That is risky, babe." "It is only risky if you get caught," she replied smoothly. "I have been researching his site. Security is lax on the night shift. And honestly, who would suspect the grieving widow in the wheelchair? I will cry at the funeral. I will tell everyone how he was my hero. And then once the check clears, my legs will miraculously start to heal, and we will be sipping margaritas on a beach in Mexico." I dropped the phone. It clattered against the center console. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely pick it up. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I saw a man who had been a fool, yes. But now I saw a target. The woman I had nursed for 6 years was not just a leech. She was a black widow. And she had just signed her own death warrant because now I wasn't just fighting for my dignity. I was fighting for my life. The silence in the house was heavy, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional passing car outside. I lay in bed next to the woman who was planning my murder, forcing my breathing to remain shallow and rhythmic, mimicking sleep. It took an hour for Patricia's breathing to deepen into the heavy, genuine slumber of the wicked. Once I was sure she was out, I slid out from under the covers, moving inch by inch to avoid shifting the mattress. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. If she woke up now, if she saw me awake, the charade would be over, and I might not make it to the morning. I crept downstairs to the living room where she left her laptop. It was a sleek, high-end model she claimed she needed for her online support groups. I opened the lid and the blue light of the screen flooded the dark room, blinding me for a second. The password prompt stared back at me. I tried her birthday. Incorrect. I tried our anniversary. Incorrect. Then with a sinking feeling, I typed in the date of the car accident. The date my life ended and her con began. The screen unlocked immediately. It was a sick trophy for her, a digital celebration of the day she enslaved me. I navigated straight to the browser history. She was arrogant, leaving tabs open as if she never expected her foolish husband to figure out how to use a computer. What I found made the bile rise in my throat. There were multiple banking tabs open, but not for our joint account at the local credit union, which currently had a balance of $12. These were offshore accounts. The Bank of the Cayman Islands. I clicked on the balance sheet. My eyes widened. There were deposits totaling over $600,000. I sat there shivering in my pajamas, staring at a number that could have saved my architecture firm. It could have saved my parents' house. It could have saved my dignity. While I was eating instant noodles and wearing boots with holes in them, she was sitting on a fortune. But where did the money come from? I clicked on the transaction history, and the answer made me want to vomit. Most of the transfers came from a PayPal account linked to Hope for Patricia. I remembered that fund. My sister had set it up. Our neighbors had organized bake sales. Strangers from across the country had sent $5 or $10, touched by the story of the brave paralyzed woman and her devoted husband. I had never touched a cent of that money, believing Patricia was using it for her experimental treatments. I was wrong. She wasn't spending it on medicine. The transfer logs showed monthly wires of $50,000 going to an account holder named T. Miller Consulting. Todd. I scrolled through months of records. Every time a donation drive peaked, the money was siphoned out within 48 hours. She was stealing from the church. She was stealing from little old ladies who sent checks in the mail. She was stealing from my own family. And she was funneling it all to the man she was sleeping with. I took out my phone and started taking photos of the screen, capturing every statement, every transfer, every damning piece of evidence. I wasn't just looking at theft. I was looking at wire fraud, embezzlement, and grand larceny. The narrative of the poor suffering victim was dead. In its place stood a cold-blooded financial predator. I thought I had reached the bottom of the rabbit hole with the stolen money, but the laptop had one more secret to give up. I opened her archived email folder expecting to find more receipts for expensive clothes or jewelry. Instead, I found a correspondence that made my blood freeze in my veins. It was a thread from 6 years ago, dated exactly 1 week before our car went off the road. The subject line was simply, "Help." The emails were between Patricia and a man with the username Mechanic Mike 88. I clicked on the first message, and my breath caught in my throat. Patricia had written Mike, I need to know how to disable a brake line on a 2015 SUV without it looking like sabotage. It needs to look like wear and tear. I sat there in the dark reading the words over and over again. My wife, the woman I shared a bed with, had actively researched how to murder me. I scrolled down. Mechanic Mike had replied with detailed instructions on where to cut and what tool to use to make the fraying look natural. He ended the email with a warning. "Be careful, lady. If you cut it too much, the fluid leaks out immediately. You have to nick it just right so it fails at high speed." Then I found the attachment. It was a digital receipt from a local hardware store dated 2 days before the crash. The item listed was a pair of heavy-duty bolt cutters. I closed my eyes and a memory flashed back to me. 2 days before the accident, I had come home early and found Patricia in the garage. She had jumped when she saw me hiding something behind her back. She told me she was looking for gardening tools. I believed her. I was such a fool. The puzzle pieces slammed together in my mind with terrifying clarity. The accident was not an accident. It was an assassination attempt. She had cut the brakes intending for me to die on that rainy highway. She wanted the $1 million life insurance payout. But she miscalculated. She did not expect to be in the car when the brakes finally failed. Or maybe she thought she could survive the crash while I perished. The irony was sickening. She tried to kill me to get rich, but instead she trapped herself in the wreckage. When the doctors told her she had spinal trauma, she must have panicked. She could not admit she tampered with the car without going to jail for attempted murder. So she did the only thing a sociopath could do. She improvised. She took the diagnosis and she amplified it. She pretended the injury was permanent. She turned her failed murder plot into a long con. I looked at her sleeping form on the sofa in the living room, visible through the open door. For 6 years, I had carried the guilt of ruining her life. I had apologized every single day. I had let her destroy my career and my self-worth because I thought I was the villain. But I was never the villain. I was the victim who survived. And she was not a paralyzed martyr. She was a failed killer who had decided that if she could not bury me in the ground, she would bury me in debt and misery. The realization washed over me like a cold wave. I was sleeping next to a woman who had tried to sever my brake lines, and when that failed, she decided to sever my soul instead. I closed the laptop gently, my hands surprisingly steady. I did not feel fear anymore. I felt a cold, calculating resolve. She wanted a tragedy. I was going to give her one, but this time I would be the one writing the ending. The office of Evelyn Carter was located on the 45th floor of a glass skyscraper that pierced the clouds. It was a place of intimidation filled with polished mahogany furniture and the scent of expensive leather. Evelyn herself was a legend in the city, known as the Iron Lady of Family Law. She was the kind of attorney who did not just win cases, she annihilated the opposition, leaving them with nothing but the clothes on their backs. I walked in wearing my dusty work boots and a flannel shirt, looking every bit the broken laborer my wife had turned me into. The receptionist looked at me with disdain, but Evelyn did not. She looked at me with the cold, calculating eyes of a predator assessing the value of a meal. "Sit down, Mr. Foster," she said, not looking up from a file she was reading. Her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. You said on the phone you have a complex situation. I charge $600 an hour. Convince me you are not wasting my time." I did not say a word. I simply reached into my pocket and pulled out a flash drive. I placed it gently on her pristine desk. Inside that small piece of plastic was the sum total of my humiliation and my salvation. It contained the video of Patricia walking around the kitchen. It contained the audio of Todd and her plotting to stage my workplace accident. It held the bank statements from the Cayman Islands and the emails about the bolt cutters from 6 years ago. I watched her face as she plugged it into her laptop. For the first 5 minutes, the room was silent except for the rhythmic clicking of her mouse. I saw her eyes widen slightly when she saw Patricia standing up. I saw her jaw tighten when she watched the video of my wife kicking my dog. But it was the email about the brake lines that made her stop completely. She froze reading those words that confirmed my wife was not just a cheat, but a failed murderer. Evelyn Carter closed the laptop slowly. She took off her reading glasses and looked me dead in the eye. The coldness in her expression had vanished, replaced by a terrifying intensity. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the desk, and for the first time since I walked in, she smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. "Mr. Foster," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that echoed in the large office. "In 30 years of practice, I have seen adultery. I have seen fraud. I have seen embezzlement. But I have never seen a Christmas present quite like this. You came here today asking me to help you get a divorce. I am telling you right now that is thinking too small. A divorce is what you give a wife who falls out of love. This woman is not a wife. She is a parasite and a criminal." She stood up and walked to the window looking out over the city she dominated. "We are not just going to divorce her, Bill. We are going to bury them. We are going to take back every cent she stole. We are going to put her and her little boyfriend in a cage for the rest of their lives. But to do that, we have to play their game one last time. Are you ready to stop being the victim and start being the executioner?" I looked at her standing there, silhouetted against the sky, and I felt the last remnants of fear leave my body. I nodded slowly. "I am ready, Evelyn. Tell me what I need to do." Evelyn paced the length of her office, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor with a rhythm that sounded like a ticking clock. She told me that simple justice was not enough for people like Patricia and Todd. She said that sociopaths thrive in the shadows, and if we went to the police quietly, Patricia would find a way to spin the narrative. She would claim temporary insanity, or she would blame the medication. Or worst of all, she would blame me for forcing her to fake it. Evelyn stopped pacing and slammed her hand on the desk. "We cannot give her wiggle room, Bill. We need to destroy her credibility so thoroughly that even her own mother would not believe a word she says. We need a public execution of her character." That is when she pitched the idea of the gala. It was diabolical in its brilliance. She told me to go home and tell Patricia that the land deal was finalized early. I was to tell her that I had the cash in hand and that we were booked on a flight to Zurich for her miraculous surgery immediately after the weekend. But before we left, I wanted to throw a massive party, a farewell gala to thank the community, the donors, and the friends who had supported us through the dark times. Evelyn explained that Patricia's greed and narcissism would blind her to the trap. She would not be able to resist one final night of being the center of attention, especially if she thought she was days away from escaping with $1 million. We listed the guests. The local news station that had run the tearful story about the paralyzed wife, the pastor of our church who had organized prayer circles for her recovery, the neighbors who had baked casseroles for us, and of course Todd. We would invite him as the guest of honor, the miracle worker whose physical therapy had prepared her for surgery. Evelyn leaned in close, her voice low and dangerous. "We are going to put them on a stage, Bill. Literally. We will rent the ballroom at the community center. We will have a big screen for a video tribute. And when they are sitting there basking in the applause, thinking they have won, we will play the footage. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. You want me to stand up there and give a speech while knowing she is planning to kill me? Evelyn looked me dead in the eye. You have to be the best actor in the world for 48 hours. You have to be the loving, doting husband one last time. You have to make her feel safe, make her feel triumphant. Because the higher she climbs, the harder she falls. And when that video plays, Bill, you won't just be clearing your name. You will be watching the exact moment her life ends. I left her office with a knot in my stomach, but a fire in my chest. It was a high-stakes gamble. If I slipped up, if I showed even a hint of anger, she would bolt. But as I thought about the smirks on their faces and the emails about cutting my brake lines, I knew I had no choice. I was going to throw the biggest party this town had ever seen, and the entertainment was going to be the truth. I drove home practicing my smile in the rearview mirror, preparing to invite my wife to her own funeral. The drive home from Evelyn Carter's office felt different than any other commute I had made in the last 6 years. Usually I drove with a heavy heart, dreading the moment I would walk through the door to face my burden. Today I drove with a terrifying sense of purpose. I was no longer the mule. I was the hunter setting a snare. When I pulled into the driveway, I took a deep breath, checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, and pasted on the smile of a loving, devoted husband. It was the hardest acting job of my life, but I knew the audience inside was waiting. Patricia was in the living room, sitting in her wheelchair by the window, watching a reality show about housewives who had too much money and not enough morals. When I walked in, she didn't even turn her head. She just let out a heavy sigh, the universal signal that she was bored and needed something. "Honey," I said, keeping my voice steady and warm. "Turn off the TV. I have news." She muted the television slowly, looking at me with that familiar mix of annoyance and expectation. "What is it?" "Bill. Did you forget the milk again?" I walked over and knelt beside her chair, taking her hand in mine. Her skin was soft, the skin of a woman who hadn't worked a day in years, while my hands were rough like sandpaper. I looked her in the eyes and delivered the lie Evelyn and I had rehearsed. "I did it, Patty. I went to the bank and the broker today. The liquidation of my pension fund and the sale of the Montana land are finalized. The wire transfer hit our account an hour ago. $200,000. The transformation was instantaneous. It was like watching a drooping flower suddenly bloom in fast motion. Her eyes, which had been dull and sleepy, snapped wide open. She sat up straighter in the chair. The boredom vanished, replaced by a hunger so raw it almost made me recoil. She squeezed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Really?" she asked, her voice breathless. "It is all there. We can book the surgery in Zurich." I nodded, fighting the urge to rip my hand away. "We can leave on Monday. I already called the clinic. They are ready for us." She let out a squeal of delight, a sound that made my stomach turn, because I knew she wasn't thinking about spinal surgery. She was thinking about Mexico. She was thinking about margaritas with Todd. She reached out and hugged me, burying her face in my neck. "Oh, Bill, you are wonderful. I knew you would come through for me. Finally, this nightmare is over." I pulled back gently, keeping my hands on her shoulders. "There is just one thing, Patty. Before we start this new chapter in Switzerland, I want to do something special." She frowned slightly, her guard going up. "What do you mean I want to throw a party?" I said, injecting as much earnestness into my voice as I could. "A gala. We have taken so much from this community. The church. The neighbors, your support group. They have donated thousands to help us get to this point. I want to invite them all to the community center on Saturday night. A farewell dinner. I want to publicly thank them, and most importantly, I want to honor you. I want everyone to see the brave woman I have been fighting for." I watched her face closely. I saw the calculation happening behind her eyes. Part of her wanted to take the money and run immediately. But a bigger part, the narcissistic part that thrived on pity and attention, could not resist the idea of a room full of people applauding her. She imagined herself as the queen of the ball, the tragic beauty saying goodbye to her adoring fans. She smiled a slow, vain smile. A gala. For me, yes, I lied. For us. And I want Todd there too. He is the reason you are strong enough to travel. He deserves to be recognized. Her eyes lit up even more at the mention of his name. She nodded vigorously. You are right, Bill. It is the polite thing to do. Let's do it. Let's give them a night they will never forget. She had no idea how right she was. It was going to be a night no one would ever forget, especially her. The hardest part of the charade was not lying to my wife. It was lying to the man who was sleeping with her in my bed. When Todd arrived that evening, the atmosphere in the house shifted instantly. He did not walk in with his usual arrogance. He walked in with suspicion. He had likely spoken to Patricia on the phone, and she had told him about the sudden windfall and the trip to Zurich. To a con artist, when a mark suddenly hands over everything they want, it can feel like a trap. I was in the kitchen pretending to organize the catering list for the gala when he cornered me. He leaned against the refrigerator, crossing his arms over his chest, his muscles bulging under his tight shirt. He stared at me for a long, uncomfortable minute, his eyes narrowing like a predator assessing a wounded animal that was acting strangely lively. You seem awfully chipper today, Bill, he said, his voice low and devoid of warmth. Usually you look like you are carrying the weight of the world. Now you are humming while you make tea. What changed? My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew this was the test. If I faltered now, if I showed even a flicker of the hatred that was burning a hole in my stomach, he would know. He would take Patricia and the money from the Cayman accounts and vanish before I could spring the trap. I forced my hands to stop shaking. I put down the pen and turned to face him, letting my shoulders slump, adopting the posture of the defeated, grateful old man he believed I was. I am happy, Todd, I said, allowing a tremor of emotion to enter my voice. I am happy because for the first time in 6 years, I see a light at the end of the tunnel. He did not buy it yet. He stepped closer, invading my personal space. The smell of his expensive cologne, the same scent I had smelled on my wife's sheets, filled my nose. It took every ounce of my willpower not to drive my fist into his jaw. Patricia says you finalized the land sale, he said, watching my face closely. That is a lot of cash to move so quickly. Are you sure you are not rushing things, old man? Maybe you should let me look over the paperwork. You know, just to protect Patricia's interests. He was testing me. He wanted to see if I would get defensive. Instead, I did something that made my skin crawl. I reached out and took his hand. I gripped it with both of mine, looking up at him with tears in my eyes. Todd, you do not understand, I said, my voice choking up. I am not rushing. I am desperate. And the reason I am so happy today is not because of the money. It is because of you. He blinked, taken aback. Me? Yes, you. I continued, pouring on the praise thick and fast. Before you came along, Patricia was giving up. She was depressed. She was in pain all the time. But you gave her hope. You worked with her when I could not. You gave her the strength to believe she could travel to Switzerland. This surgery, this future we have, it is all because of your hard work. I saw the confusion in his eyes give way to his massive ego. He puffed out his chest slightly. I looked him dead in the eye and delivered the line that sealed his fate. You are not just a therapist to us, Todd. You are the benefactor of this family. I honestly do not know what I would do without you. That is why I need you at the gala on Saturday. I want to toast you in front of everyone. I want the whole town to know that you are the man who saved my wife. The suspicion vanished from his face, replaced by a smug, self-satisfied grin. He pulled his hand away but clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that was patronizing and possessive. "Well, Bill, I just did my job," he said, his arrogance returning in full force. "But you are right. I did work miracles on her." He walked away whistling, heading upstairs to celebrate with my wife. I turned back to the counter, my smile vanishing instantly. He believed me because his vanity was stronger than his instincts. He thought he was the hero of the story. He had no idea he had just accepted an invitation to his own execution. I burned through savings I did not actually have to book the Crystal Ballroom at the downtown hotel. It was a place reserved for high society weddings and political fundraisers, not for a construction worker and his sick wife. But I needed the stage to be big. I needed the lights to be bright. I spent the morning on the phone playing the role of the humble, grateful beneficiary. I called the local news station that had run the original story about Patricia's tragic accident. I told the producer that we had a miracle to announce and that we wanted to give an exclusive interview before we left for Switzerland. They ate it up. They promised to send a camera crew and their lead anchor. Then I called the donors. I invited Mrs. Higgins from down the street, who had given us $50 from her Social Security check every month. I invited the pastor of Grace Community Church, who had organized 3 separate bake sales for us. I invited my old colleagues from the architecture firm. I wanted every single person who had been emotionally manipulated by my wife to be in that room. I wanted witnesses. But the most important guests were the ones not on the official list. Evelyn had arranged everything with Detective Miller. There would be 6 plainclothes officers in the room. 2 would be posing as servers carrying trays of champagne. 2 would be dressed as distant relatives of mine from out of town. And 2 would be stationed at the exits just in case Todd or Patricia decided to make a run for it. The trap was not just set, it was fortified with steel. While I was orchestrating her downfall, Patricia was busy dressing for it. She insisted on going to the most expensive boutique in the city. She made me drive her there and wait in the car while Todd went inside to help her shop. It was another humiliation, another slap in the face that she did not want her husband seeing her try on clothes, but she was fine with her physical therapist seeing everything. When they came out 2 hours later, Patricia was beaming. She held up a garment bag like it was a trophy. "I bought the gold one, Bill," she squealed. "It costs $4,000, but Todd said I look like a goddess in it. It is perfect for my grand exit." I looked at the bag and forced a smile. "You deserve it, honey," I said. "You should look like a queen on your big night." That night she hung the dress on the outside of the closet door. It was a shimmering gold-sequined gown, tight-fitting and backless. It was not a dress for a crippled woman. It was a dress for a showgirl. As I lay in bed watching the moonlight hit the sequins, I realized she had bought it knowing she would stand up in it. She had probably practiced walking in it in the dressing room with Todd. She was planning to dazzle the crowd with her beauty while I stood in the shadows. She had no idea that the gold dress would be the last thing she ever wore as a free woman. Tomorrow night, the only accessory she would be wearing would be a pair of handcuffs. The Crystal Ballroom was a kaleidoscope of light and deception. I had spared no expense, or rather, I had spared no expense of the credit I had taken out in my own name to fund this final act. The chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over the room, reflecting off the crystal flutes of champagne held by the 100 guests who had gathered to say goodbye. Soft jazz played from a live band in the corner, a soothing soundtrack to the most stressful night of my life. To the untrained eye, this was a celebration of hope and resilience. To me, it was a crime scene waiting to be processed. In the center of it all sat Patricia. She looked magnificent, I have to admit. The gold-sequined dress she had bought with Todd hugged her body, shimmering with every breath she took. She had her hair swept up in an elegant chignon, exposing her neck, and she wore a diamond necklace that I knew she must have bought with the stolen charity funds. She sat in her titanium wheelchair, like a queen on a throne holding court. A line of well-wishers had formed to greet her. I watched as Mrs. Higgins, our elderly neighbor, leaned down to hug her, wiping tears from her eyes. I could hear snippets of the conversation from where I stood. "You are an inspiration, Patricia. You are so brave. God has a plan for you in Switzerland." Patricia nodded humbly, dabbing at her dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling just enough to sell the performance. "I am just so grateful for a second chance." I stood in the shadows near the velvet curtains at the back of the room, clutching a glass of scotch that I had no intention of drinking. My knuckles were white against the crystal tumbler. I needed to be sober. I needed to be sharp. I watched Todd moving through the crowd. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him perfectly, likely purchased with the money he siphoned from my bank account last week. He played the part of the concerned professional to perfection. He stood just behind Patricia's chair, his hand resting protectively on the handle, occasionally leaning down to whisper something in her ear. To the room, he was checking on his patient. To me, he was whispering dirty little secrets to his accomplice. I saw them exchange a look, a quick smoldering glance of shared triumph. They were laughing at everyone in this room. They were laughing at Mrs. Higgins. They were laughing at the pastor. And most of all, they were laughing at me. The anger in my chest was a physical weight, heavy and hot. I wanted to march over there and tip that wheelchair over. I wanted to scream the truth until my throat bled. But I forced myself to stay put. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of expensive lilies and betrayal. Let them have this moment, I told myself. Let them drink the champagne. Let them bask in the adoration. Let them think they have gotten away with the perfect crime. Because the higher they climb on that pedestal, the more bone-shattering the fall will be. The video file was queued up on the laptop connected to the projector behind the stage. The remote was in my pocket. The police were positioned at the doors. The stage was set. I finished my water set, the glass down on a passing tray, and adjusted my tie. It was showtime. The jazz band faded into a respectful silence as I stepped up to the podium. The feedback from the microphone let out a high-pitched squeal that made a few guests wince, but it was nothing compared to the noise I was about to unleash on their lives. The spotlight hit me squarely in the face, blindingly white and hot. It turned the rest of the room into a sea of darkness, but I knew exactly where they were. I knew where Patricia was sitting, basking in the adoration. I knew where Todd was standing, likely checking his watch and thinking about how soon he could get his hands on my money. I gripped the sides of the podium, feeling the wood grain under my sweating palms. I cleared my throat, and the sound echoed through the massive ballroom like thunder. Friends, neighbors, and generous souls, I began my voice steady and booming. Thank you. Thank you for being here tonight, to witness the end of a very long, very dark chapter. For 6 years, I have watched my wife fight a battle that most of us cannot even imagine. I have watched her suffer in silence. I have watched her struggle against a body that betrayed her. I paused for effect, letting the sympathy in the room thicken. I looked down at Patricia. Even in the dim light, the sequins of her gold dress caught the spotlight, making her glitter like a disco ball. She was dabbing her eyes again, playing the part to the bitter end. You know, I continued, leaning into the microphone, a small, tight smile playing on my lips. Living with Patricia has taught me so much about the human spirit. She is without a doubt the most committed person I have ever met. When she sets her mind to something, she sees it through, no matter the cost to those around her. She is truly a world-class actress. Excuse me, I mean a warrior. A ripple of nervous laughter moved through the crowd. They thought I had stumbled over my words, a clumsy husband overwhelmed by emotion. I saw Patricia's smile falter for a fraction of a second. Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she recovered quickly, forcing a laugh to show she was in on the joke. I did not correct myself. I just kept going. And we cannot forget the man standing behind her. Todd. I pointed into the darkness, where I knew he was lurking. The spotlight swung around, catching Todd off guard. He blinked, raising a hand in a mock salute, flashing his bright white teeth. Todd, I said, my voice dripping with a sincerity that was purely toxic. You came into our home when we were at our lowest. You touched my wife in ways, well, in ways that no other doctor ever could. You found the feeling in her legs when everyone else said it was gone. You are not just a physical therapist, Todd. You are a magician. You made things disappear, like my savings and my doubt. The crowd applauded politely, missing the venom in my words entirely. Todd puffed out his chest, soaking it up. He looked like a rooster in a henhouse, completely unaware that the farmer was holding an axe. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small black remote control. My thumb rested on the play button. I wanted to give you both a gift tonight, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. A tribute. I spent the last few nights putting together a video collection of our most memorable moments. I wanted everyone here to see the real Patricia. I wanted them to see the miracle of her recovery exactly as I saw it. So if you will all turn your attention to the big screen behind me, I think you will find this footage very revealing. I looked at Patricia one last time. She was smiling, expecting a montage of her struggle, photos of her in the hospital, maybe some sad music. She was expecting a canonization. I pressed the button. The screen flickered to life, and the smile on her face was about to die forever. The projector beam cut through the darkness like a lighthouse in a storm, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The massive screen behind me descended slowly, accompanied by the opening chords of a sad piano ballad I had selected specifically to manipulate the tear ducts of every person in the room. The first image that faded onto the screen was the wreckage. It was a grainy police photo of our SUV crumpled like a tin can at the bottom of the ravine. The silence in the ballroom was instant and heavy. I heard a collective gasp ripple through the crowd, followed by the sound of glass clinking as people set down their drinks. Then came the hospital photos. There was Patricia lying in the trauma unit, hooked up to tubes and wires, looking small and broken. There was a photo of her in her first wheelchair, staring wistfully out a window at a garden she could not walk in. I had taken that photo myself, thinking I was capturing her strength. Now I knew I was just capturing her boredom. The montage continued, a slideshow of calculated misery. Patricia struggling to reach a book on a high shelf. Patricia sitting alone at a party, looking isolated. Patricia holding my hand, looking up at me with those big doe eyes that screamed, "Save me." I looked out at the audience, and the reaction was exactly what she wanted. Mrs. Higgins was openly weeping, pressing a napkin to her face. The pastor was shaking his head slowly, his face a mask of solemn sorrow. Even the news anchor was looking misty-eyed, completely sold on the narrative of the tragic beauty and her devoted servant. They were not seeing a con artist. They were seeing a saint who had been dealt a bad hand. But the best performance was happening right in the front row. Patricia was staring up at her own face on the screen, and she began to tremble. It was a subtle movement, just enough to catch the light on her sequins. She reached up with a manicured hand and dabbed at the corner of her eye, ensuring she did not smudge her mascara. She looked so fragile, so vulnerable. She turned slightly towards Todd, who was standing like a sentinel beside her. He leaned down his face, the picture of professional concern, and placed a hand on her shoulder, giving it a reassuring squeeze. I watched them from the podium, and my stomach churned. They were feeding off the energy in the room like vampires. They were basking in the pity, drinking it in like fine wine. Todd whispered something in her ear, and she nodded bravely, offering him a weak, tragic smile. They looked like the perfect team, the healer and the survivor, united against a cruel world. They had no idea that the piano music was about to stop. They had no idea that the slideshow of sympathy was just the appetizer, and the main course was going to be raw, unadulterated truth. I gripped the remote in my pocket, my thumb hovering over the next track button. Enjoy the tears, I thought. Enjoy the applause. Because in about 10 seconds, you are going to wish you were back in that car wreck. Suddenly, the mournful piano music cut out. It did not fade away gently. It stopped with a jarring digital screech that made half the room jump in their seats. The screen flickered violently, turning into a blizzard of gray static. The tech guy at the back of the room started frantically tapping on his console, thinking the system had crashed, but I had locked him out. This was not a glitch. This was the feature presentation. The static cleared as abruptly as it had appeared, replaced by the sharp, high-contrast imagery of the hidden camera I had installed in the smoke detector. The timestamp in the corner was glowing white. 2 days ago, 2 a.m. The setting was unmistakable. It was our kitchen, the room where I had cooked thousands of meals for a woman who claimed she could not stand long enough to boil water. At first, the audience was confused. They squinted at the screen, waiting for the heartwarming conclusion. Maybe this was a video of me carrying her to bed. Maybe it was a clip of her struggling to do her exercises. But then the figure walked into the frame. She did not roll. She did not shuffle. She walked. It was Patricia. She was wearing her short silk robe, the one she said was too difficult to put on without help. She strode across the kitchen with the grace of a dancer. There was no hesitation in her step, no limp. She walked straight to the high cabinet above the refrigerator, the one even I had to stretch to reach. She stood up on her toes, engaging her calf muscles, those same muscles the doctor had marveled at, and grabbed a bottle of wine. Then she did something that sealed her fate. She did not just walk back to the counter. She did a little spin. A pirouette. She was dancing with the bottle in her hand, shaking her hips, celebrating her deception in the privacy of her own home. She looked vibrant. She looked strong. She looked utterly, completely healthy. The silence that fell over the crystal ballroom was heavy enough to crush a man. It was absolute. The weeping stopped. The whispering stopped. Even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. It was the sound of 100 minds trying to reconcile the image of the paralyzed saint sitting in the wheelchair with the woman dancing on the screen. They looked from the video to Patricia and back again, their brains misfiring. Then came the sound that broke the spell. Somewhere near the bar, a waiter lost his grip. A crystal champagne flute hit the marble floor, shattering with a sound like a gunshot. The noise echoed through the silent room, causing people to flinch. I looked down at the front row. Patricia was frozen. Her hand was halfway to her face, holding a tissue, but she was no longer crying. Her face had drained of all color, leaving her pale and ghostly under the heavy stage makeup. Her eyes were locked on the screen, wide with a terror so raw, it was almost palpable. She was not blinking. She was watching her life implode frame by frame. Beside her, Todd had taken a step back, his hand dropping from her shoulder as if she had suddenly caught fire. He looked around the room, his eyes darting toward the exit, like a rat sensing the ship was going down. But the doors were blocked. The show was far from over. If the sight of her dancing was a slap in the face, the next clip was a knife to the heart. The video feed switched again. This time it was the footage from the teddy bear camera on the dresser. The angle was lower, looking up at the bed. The bed that I had paid for. The bed where I slept alone while my wife claimed she was in too much pain to be touched. The audience watched in horror as Todd walked into the frame. He was not wearing his scrubs. He was barely wearing anything at all. And Patricia, the woman who supposedly had zero sensation below the waist, wrapped her legs around him with the enthusiasm of a teenager. The gasps in the room turned into a low rumble of disgust, but it was the sound that turned the room into a riot. I had boosted the audio in post-production, so every whisper was deafening. Todd's voice boomed through the speakers. "Is the old man gone yet?" And Patricia's reply came back crisp and clear. "He is at the site. Listen, we need to talk about the timeline. The money from the land sale is good, but the life insurance is better. A workplace accident. Todd, it happens all the time. Scaffolding falls, people slip. We just need to make sure he does not come home." The collective gasp turned into a roar. It was the sound of betrayal on a massive scale. I saw the pastor stand up, his face red with fury. He had held prayer circles for this woman. He had vouched for her character. Now he was listening to her plan the murder of her husband, Mrs. Higgins dropped her cane clattering against the floor. The donors who had given their pension money started shouting. "Liar. Murderer." The words rippled through the crowd, gaining volume and venom. The camera crew from the local news station realized they had struck gold. They stopped filming the screen and swung their heavy lenses toward the couple in the front row. Flashbulbs started popping like strobe lights, blinding and relentless. Click, click, click. Each flash was capturing the face of a monster exposed. Patricia covered her face with her hands, trying to shield herself from the assault of light, but there was nowhere to hide. The sequins on her dress that were meant to dazzle were now just reflecting her shame. Todd looked like he was about to vomit. He held up a hand trying to block the cameras, shouting something about legal action, but his voice was drowned out by the recording of his own conspiracy. The illusion of the saintly victim and the miracle doctor was incinerated in seconds. In its place sat two grifters who had been caught plotting a homicide. I stood at the podium watching the chaos unfold, and for the first time in 6 years, I felt lighter. The truth did not just set me free, it set the whole room on fire. They were no longer looking at a tragedy. They were looking at a crime scene, and the flashes of the cameras were the lightning before the storm of justice that was about to rain down on them. The video feed cut to black, leaving the ballroom suspended in a thick, suffocating silence. The only sound was the hum of the projector fan and the jagged breathing of the woman in the gold dress. I walked down the steps of the stage, the microphone still clutched in my hand like a weapon. The crowd parted for me, their faces a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. They knew they were watching a car crash in slow motion, and they could not look away. I stopped 3 feet from her wheelchair. Patricia was trembling so violently that the sequins on her gown were vibrating, creating a shimmering aura of fear around her. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and wet, pleading silently. She mouthed the word, "Please," but I had no mercy left in me. I had spent 6 years giving her mercy, and she had repaid me with arsenic. "Patricia," I boomed, my voice amplified by the speakers echoing off the high ceilings. "Why are you shaking? You wanted a miracle, didn't you? You told everyone here that you were praying for a breakthrough. You told the pastor you needed divine intervention." I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "Well, hallelujah, Patty. I think the Lord is working overtime tonight. I think the Spirit is moving you right now." She shook her head frantically, gripping the armrests of her chair so hard her knuckles turned white. "No, Bill, please," she whispered. "Don't be shy," I yelled, straightening up and addressing the crowd. "Look at her legs, everyone. Look at those muscles. She doesn't need surgery in Switzerland. She needs a dance floor." I reached into my tuxedo pocket. Earlier that day, I had stopped at a novelty store. I remembered that Patricia had a phobia of snakes. It was a primal, irrational fear that she couldn't control. Even a picture of one would make her hyperventilate. I pulled out the realistic coiled rubber cobra I had bought for $5. I looked her dead in the eye. "You know what they say, Patricia. There is always a snake in the grass. Or in this case, under the chair." I tossed the rubber snake right between her feet. "Watch out," I screamed. "It is going to bite." Biology took over. The lizard brain that controls survival instincts bypassed her conscious mind. She did not think. She did not calculate. She reacted. Patricia let out a blood-curdling shriek. In one fluid, explosive motion, the woman who had not walked in 6 years launched herself out of the chair. She didn't just stand. She jumped. She leaped backward with the agility of a cat, her high heels clicking loudly against the hardwood floor. She kicked the wheelchair away in her panic, sending it crashing onto its side with a deafening metallic clatter. She landed perfectly on both feet, knees bent, balanced and strong. She backed away from the toy snake, her chest heaving, her hands raised in defense. For a second, she didn't realize what she had done. She was just relieved to be away from the snake. But then she heard the sound. It wasn't applause. It wasn't music. It was the sound of 300 people gasping at once. I stood there pointing at her, a dark smile spreading across my face. "It is a miracle," I shouted, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "She can walk. She can jump. Praise the Lord, everyone. Patricia Foster is healed." She froze. She looked down at her own legs, standing firm in the high heels. She looked at the overturned wheelchair. Then she looked up at the crowd, and she realized the trap had snapped shut. There was no medical explanation that could save her now. She was standing in the spotlight, healthy, strong, and completely exposed. The moment she realized she was standing on two perfectly functional legs in front of 200 witnesses was the moment the human being vanished, and the cornered animal took over. Patricia looked left, then right, her eyes darting frantically around the room like a trapped bird beating its wings against a cage. She saw the flashes of the cameras, which were now firing in a strobe light frenzy, capturing every second of her miracle recovery. She saw the faces of our neighbors twisting from shock into raw, unadulterated anger. She saw the pastor closing his eyes in prayer, or maybe in disgust. She did not try to explain. She did not try to fake a fall or collapse back into the chair claiming adrenaline. She knew it was over. The flight instinct that had been dormant for 6 years kicked in with explosive force. She bolted. The woman who claimed she could not feel her toes spun around in her 4-inch gold stilettos and took off running toward the double doors at the back of the ballroom. She did not run with a limp. She ran with the speed and power of an athlete. Her gold dress shimmered as she weaved through the tables, dodging waiters and guests who were too stunned to stop her. It was a grotesque sight, a sparkling figure sprinting through a crowd of people she had emotionally held hostage for half a decade. I did not chase her. I did not move a muscle. I just stood there on the dance floor next to the overturned wheelchair, watching her run. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Not because I loved her, but because every step she took was another nail in her coffin. Every yard she sprinted was indisputable proof of her guilt. She was literally running away from the truth, and in doing so, she was running straight into a prison cell. I slowly lifted the microphone back to my lips. The room was chaotic, people shouting and pointing, but my voice cut through the noise like a bell. I watched her reach the doors, pushing them open with a strength that betrayed every lie she had ever told about her upper body weakness. I turned to the crowd, my face calm, almost serene. I gestured toward the empty doorway where my wife had just vanished. "Well, folks," I said, my voice dry and devoid of any warmth, "you can cancel the trip to Switzerland. It looks like my home remedies worked better than any surgeon in Zurich." I looked down at the rubber snake lying on the floor, the $5 toy that had dismantled a $1 million con. I kicked it gently with the toe of my boot. "See," I said, looking straight into the camera lens of the news crew. "I told you I would heal her. All it took was a little motivation." I let the microphone drop from my hand. It hit the floor with a heavy thud, the sound echoing through the ballroom, like a gavel banging down in a courtroom. The performance was over. My wife was gone. But the justice system was waiting for her in the hallway, and I knew she wouldn't get far in those heels. Todd watched his meal ticket sprint out the door and realized he was the only target left in the center of the ring. The arrogance that had defined him for 6 years evaporated instantly, replaced by the frantic desperation of a cornered rat. He did not look at me. He did not look at the cameras. He looked for the nearest exit that wasn't blocked by a wall of angry donors. He spotted the service doors leading to the kitchen and made his move. He shoved a waiter aside, sending a tray of champagne flutes crashing to the floor, and bolted toward the swinging metal doors. He was fast, fueled by the adrenaline of a man who knows his life is over, but he was not fast enough. Just as he reached the exit, the doors flew open with a violent swing. It was not a chef on the other side. It was Dr. Adrian Kovic. The man who had discovered the lie in the hospital room was now standing as the gatekeeper of justice. Todd tried to shoulder his way past, shouting a curse word, his eyes wild with panic. But Kovic stood his ground like a statue. The doctor did not reach for a scalpel or a stethoscope. Instead, he pulled back his right arm and delivered a punch that seemed to carry the weight of every ethical oath Todd had ever violated. The sound of his fist connecting with Todd's jaw was a sickening, meaty crack that echoed over the sudden silence of the room. Todd crumbled like a wet paper bag. He slid down the wall, his legs splayed out in front of him, blood trickling from his split lip onto the pristine white of his tuxedo shirt. He looked up, dazed and blinking, trying to understand how the old doctor had just knocked him out cold. "That is for making a mockery of my profession," Kovic said, shaking his hand out and adjusting his cuffs. At the exact same moment, the drama at the main entrance reached its climax. Patricia had not made it past the valet stand. The two men I had introduced as my distant cousins, seasoned detectives in ill-fitting suits, had intercepted her on the red carpet. They dragged her back into the ballroom, her gold dress ripped at the hem, her high heels scraping against the floor as she kicked and screamed. They marched her right back to the center of the dance floor, forcing her to stand next to the bleeding, groaning form of her lover. "Police, everybody stay back!" The shout came from all sides as uniformed officers swarmed into the room, their badges flashing under the crystal chandeliers. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut was the sweetest music I had ever heard. Click, click, tight and final. They cuffed Todd while he was still on the floor, hauling him up by his collar like a sack of garbage. They cuffed Patricia with her hands behind the back of her $4,000 gown. The scene was a tableau of absolute ruin. The two masterminds, the Romeo and Juliet of fraud, were reunited not on a beach in Cabo, but in the center of the trap they had built for themselves. Patricia immediately started screaming, her voice shrill and desperate. "It was him. It was all his idea. He forced me to do it. He is a predator." Todd spat blood onto the floor and shouted back, "You lying witch!" She planned the whole thing. She cut the brake lines. She is the one who wanted him dead. They turned on each other instantly, the romance dissolving into a desperate, clawing fight for survival. I stood there watching the flashing blue lights of the police cruisers reflecting off the sequins of her dress and the blood on his shirt. The reporters, sensing blood, crowded and shoving microphones into their faces, capturing every second of their meltdown. I took a sip of my scotch, the ice clinking softly against the glass. The party was officially over, but for the first time in 6 years, I could finally breathe. The interrogation rooms at the second precinct were soundproof, but the venom spitting out of them was toxic enough to seep through the walls. I sat in the observation room staring through the one-way glass. It was the final act of the play, and the genre had shifted from tragedy to a courtroom thriller. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, Patricia looked grotesque. Her makeup was smeared down her cheeks in black streaks, and her torn gold dress, which had looked so glamorous an hour ago, now looked like a cheap costume. She was not crying anymore. She was hissing. The detective slammed a file onto the metal table, and Patricia flinched. She did not ask for a lawyer. She asked for a deal. She pointed a manicured finger at the wall that separated her from her lover, and threw him to the wolves without a second of hesitation. It was him, she screamed, her voice cracking with desperation. Todd is a predator. He preyed on me. I was vulnerable. I was lonely. He told me that if I did not transfer the charity money to his account, he would tell everyone I could walk. He blackmailed me, detective. I am a victim here. He made me steal from the church. He made me sign those checks. I was terrified of him. She was painting a picture of a helpless woman trapped by a manipulative boyfriend, but in the room next door, Todd was singing a very different song. He was holding an ice pack to his swollen jaw where Dr. Kovic had punched him, and he was sweating profusely. When the officers told him that Patricia was blaming him for the fraud, he laughed. It was a dry, bitter sound. She is lying, he spat blood mixing with saliva. That woman is the devil. You think I am the bad guy because I took some money. I am a saint compared to her. Ask her about the car accident. Ask her about the brake lines. The detective in Todd's room leaned forward, sensing the breakthrough. What about the brake lines, Todd? Todd looked directly into the mirror, as if he knew I was watching. She told me she did it. She bought bolt cutters from a hardware store 2 days before the crash. She showed me the receipt once when she was drunk. She bragged about it. She said she nicked the line just enough so it would fail at high speed. She wanted to kill her husband for the insurance money years before I even met her. I am just a con artist, detective. I like money, but I am not a murderer. She is. She tried to kill Bill Foster, and when she failed, she decided to bleed him dry instead. I watched as the detectives moved between the rooms, playing the recordings of their confessions to each other. It was a feeding frenzy. As soon as Patricia heard Todd's voice accusing her of the brake tampering, she exploded. She started listing every account number, every offshore routing number, every illegal transaction Todd had ever made. She gave them the passwords to his Cayman accounts. She gave them the dates he sold her pain medication on the black market. They tore each other apart with the ferocity of starving dogs. There was no loyalty. There was no love. There was only self-preservation. They stripped each other of every secret, every lie, and every defense, until there was nothing left but the naked, ugly truth. I stood there listening to the people who had destroyed my life destroy each other, and I felt a profound sense of closure. They deserved each other, and now they would share the same fate, locked in cages built from their own betrayal. The wheels of justice usually grind slowly, but in the case of the people versus Patricia Foster and Todd Miller, they spun with the speed and violence of a circular saw. There was no long, drawn-out legal drama. There were no surprise witnesses or last-minute exonerations. The evidence I had handed over to Evelyn Carter and Detective Miller was so comprehensive, so irrefutable, that their high-priced defense attorneys looked like they wanted to crawl under the defense table and hide. The courtroom was packed every single day. The neighbors were there. The donors were there. The media was there. It was the hottest ticket in town, not to see a show, but to see a reckoning. The prosecutor was a sharp young man who laid out the case with surgical precision. He did not need to shout. He simply pointed to the screen. He played the video of Patricia dancing in the kitchen again, and the jury looked at her with pure, unmasked disgust. He showed the bank transfers, the money siphoned from the cancer fund, and the church donations. He projected the email thread about the bolt cutters onto the wall. The room was so silent, you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. It was not a trial. It was an autopsy of their character. Patricia sat at the defense table wearing a prison-issued orange jumpsuit that washed out her complexion. The gold dress was gone. The makeup was gone. The mask was gone. She looked small and gray and utterly defeated. She refused to look at the jury. She refused to look at the gallery. And most of all, she refused to look at me. Todd sat 10 feet away from her, but they might as well have been on different planets. He sat slumped in his chair, his arrogance replaced by the terrifying reality of federal prison. They were no longer the dynamic duo. They were just two criminals trying to save their own skins, but the trap they had built was too tight. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. When they returned, the foreman did not hesitate. Guilty. On all counts. Grand larceny, wire fraud, insurance fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. The judge was a stern woman with eyes that had seen everything, but even she looked shaken by the cruelty of their scheme. She asked them if they had anything to say. Todd stayed silent, staring at his hands. Patricia tried to squeeze out a few tears, mumbling about how she was sorry, but the judge cut her off. She looked down from the bench, her voice ringing out like a bell. You two did not just steal money. You stole faith. You stole the goodwill of a community. And you plotted to end the life of a man who did nothing but care for you. There is no rehabilitation for souls as hollow as yours." She raised her gavel. "For the crimes committed, I sentence you both to 25 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole." The sound of the gavel striking wood was the best sound I had ever heard. It was louder than the applause at the gala. It was louder than the crash of the wheelchair. It was the sound of a door slamming shut on 6 years of hell. Patricia let out a sob as the bailiffs moved in to cuff her, but no one moved to comfort her. The gallery remained seated, watching with cold satisfaction as the two of them were led away in chains. I watched them go. I watched the door close behind them. And just like that, the weight I had been carrying on my back for a lifetime simply vanished. Sending them to prison was the punishment, but stripping them of their spoils was the justice. The day after the sentencing, I sat back down in Evelyn Carter's office. The criminal trial had taken their freedom, but the civil suits were about to take everything else. Evelyn did not treat this phase with any less intensity than the criminal case. She unleashed a blizzard of paperwork, filing injunctions and freezing orders that locked down every single asset Todd and Patricia had managed to squirrel away. We went after the Cayman accounts. We went after the shell companies. It was a tedious process untangling the web of lies they had spun, but we found most of it. We seized Todd's sports car, which was auctioned off to pay back the charity. We seized Patricia's jewelry, the diamonds she had flaunted in my face while I was eating instant noodles. Seeing those items listed on a forfeiture document gave me a cold, grim satisfaction. They were just objects, but they represented the pieces of my life they had stolen, and now I was taking them back, piece by piece. The reality was that a lot of the cash was gone. They had lived like kings on my dime, and you cannot get a refund on champagne that has already been drunk, or hotel suites that have already been slept in. I had to accept that I was walking away from this financially bruised. The retirement fund was depleted, and the savings were a distant memory. But then came the phone call that mattered more than any bank balance. It was the bank that held the deed to my parents' old house. This was the home where I grew up, the house my father had built with his own hands, and the property I had been forced to sign over to a developer to pay for Patricia's imaginary medical bills. The bank manager explained that because the sale had been authorized using a power of attorney that was now proven to be fraudulent, the entire transaction was null and void. The developer had pulled out the moment the scandal hit the news, not wanting to be associated with a pair of felons. I drove out to the property that afternoon. The grass was overgrown and the paint was peeling, but it was still standing. I walked up the driveway, my boots crunching on the gravel, just like they did when I was a boy. The for sale sign was still stuck in the front lawn, leaning crookedly to the left. I grabbed it with both hands and ripped it out of the earth, throwing it into the back of my truck. I unlocked the front door and the smell hit me. It was the smell of cedar wood and old books, the smell of safety. I walked through the empty rooms, running my hand along the walls. I had lost 6 years of my life. I had lost my trust in people. I had lost a fortune in legal fees. But standing there in the living room where my parents used to dance, I realized I had recovered the one thing they could not take from me. I had my foundation back. I sat down on the dusty floor, and for the first time in a long time, I did not feel like a victim. I felt like a man who had survived a storm and found his way home. The house was empty, but it was mine, and that was enough to start rebuilding. For the first few weeks after the trial, I sat in my parents' old house and stared at the walls. The silence was peaceful, but it was also empty. I had spent 6 years in a constant state of high alert, navigating a minefield of lies and medical emergencies that never existed. Now that the war was over, I had to figure out who Bill Foster was when he wasn't being a nursemaid or a victim. I walked into the spare room where I had stored my old life. Under a heavy canvas sheet covered in years of dust sat my drafting table. It was the altar I had abandoned to worship at the shrine of my wife's greed. I pulled the sheet off. The dust motes danced in the afternoon sun, settling on the floor like snow. I ran my hand over the smooth wooden surface. My fingers were calloused now, rough from hauling concrete and gripping hammers, but the muscle memory was still there. I found a box of charcoal pencils and a roll of fresh vellum. I sat down on the stool, and for the first time in forever, I didn't think about debt or betrayal. I thought about space and light. I thought about structure. I began to draw. At first the lines were shaky, uncertain, like a man learning to walk again. But slowly, the architect in me woke up. I didn't want to design office towers or shopping malls. I wanted to build something that mattered. I wanted to build an answer to the insult Patricia had inflicted on the world. She had used disability as a costume, as a way to steal and manipulate. I wanted to create a place that honored the people she had mocked. I started designing a rehabilitation center, but not just a sterile clinic with fluorescent lights and cold linoleum floors. I designed a sanctuary. I sketched out a building made of glass and warm timber, a place flooded with natural light. I designed wide open atriums where wheelchairs could move without barriers. I created therapy gardens with sensory paths where patients could feel the sun on their faces while they learned to use their bodies again. I poured every ounce of my pain into those blueprints. Every line I drew was an act of defiance. When I designed the hydraulic resistance pool, I thought about the fake therapy sessions Todd had charged me for. When I drew the accessible ramps that wound gently through the courtyard, I thought about the wheelchair Patricia had kicked aside to run away. I was taking the ugly, twisted wreckage of my marriage and refining it into something clean and honest. I decided I would offer the design for free to the city. I would use the connections I still had from my old firm to get materials donated. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about balance. It was about the universe owing a debt to the people who were truly suffering, the people who couldn't jump up and run when things got hard. Night after night, I worked until my eyes burned and my back ached. But it was a good ache. It was the ache of creation, not destruction. As the building took shape on the paper, I realized that I wasn't just designing a center for other people to heal. With every wall I erected and every foundation I laid down in graphite, I was rebuilding myself. The architect was back, and this time I was building on solid ground. The grand opening of the Phoenix Rehabilitation Center was only a week away. I stood in the central courtyard surrounded by the smell of fresh cedar and blooming jasmine. The late afternoon sun cast long, warm shadows across the limestone walls, turning the glass atrium into a glittering jewel. It was quiet here. The construction crews had gone home for the day, leaving me alone with the physical manifestation of my recovery. I ran my hand along the smooth railing of the accessibility ramp, a curve of steel that I had drawn on my parents' dining table during those long, sleepless nights. It felt solid. It felt permanent. I heard the crunch of footsteps on the gravel path behind me. I did not flinch. For years, the sound of approaching footsteps had filled me with dread, wondering what new disaster Patricia had concocted. But now my pulse remained steady. I turned around to see Evelyn Carter walking toward me. She looked different. The severe power suits and the pulled-back hair of the courtroom were gone. She was wearing a soft, cream-colored trench coat, and her hair fell loose around her shoulders, catching the golden light of the sunset. She did not look like the Iron Lady today. She looked like a woman who was finally off the clock. "I thought I might find you here," she said, her voice softer than I had ever heard it. She stopped beside me, looking up at the glass ceiling of the atrium. "You know, Bill, I have put a lot of bad people behind bars. I have won millions in settlements, but I have never seen anything like this. This building is the best closing argument I have ever witnessed." I smiled, feeling a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the sun. "It feels good, Evelyn. It feels like I finally cleared the rubble." We stood there in comfortable silence for a moment, watching a pair of birds land on the edge of the therapy pool. It was strange to stand next to her without a stack of legal documents between us. For months, she had been my shield and my sword. She had seen me at my absolute lowest, broken and humiliated. And yet she was still here, standing in the garden I built. She turned to face me, and I noticed that her eyes were not scanning for weakness or strategy. They were just looking at me. So she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, "The lawsuits are settled. The assets are frozen. The center is built. You are officially out of battles to fight Bill Foster. What are you going to do with all this peace and quiet?" I looked at the building, then back at her. I honestly do not know. I have been running on adrenaline and anger for so long, I am not sure I remember how to just exist. Evelyn smiled, a genuine warm expression that transformed her face. "Well, I might have a suggestion. There is a small Italian place around the corner. They make incredible pasta, and they have a wine list that does not require a subpoena to enjoy. I was thinking maybe we could go there. Not as attorney and client, just as two people who appreciate a good victory." I felt a sudden lightness, a flutter in my stomach that I had not felt in a decade. It was the feeling of a door opening, not a cell door, but a front door. I looked at this brilliant, formidable woman who had helped me reclaim my life, and I realized that maybe the rebuilding process wasn't quite finished yet. "I would like that very much, Evelyn," I said, offering her my arm. She looped her arm through mine, and we walked out of the garden together, leaving the shadows of the past behind us. The sun had set, but for the first time in 6 years, I wasn't afraid of the dark. I had a new blueprint for the future, and I had a feeling it was going to be a masterpiece. I used to believe that trust was the concrete foundation of a marriage. I thought it was something you poured once, and it hardened, and it would hold up the weight of the world forever. As an architect, I should have known better. Even concrete can crack if the ground beneath it is shifting. I learned the hard way that trust is not concrete. It is glass. It is clear and beautiful when it is kept safe, but if you drop it, it shatters into a million invisible pieces that will cut you to the bone if you try to put them back together. For 6 years, I lived inside a house built of lies. I walked on eggshells, terrified of waking a sleeping demon that didn't even exist. I sacrificed my career, my financial future, and my self-respect on the altar of my wife's imaginary suffering. Looking back now, the hardest part to swallow is not the money I lost or the time I wasted. It is the realization of how willing I was to be blind. We tell ourselves that love is about unconditional faith. We tell ourselves that a good husband stands by his wife through sickness and health. But there is a terrifyingly thin line between being a supportive partner and being a willing victim. Patricia knew that. She knew that my need to be the protector was my greatest weakness, and she weaponized my own empathy against me. People say they want the truth, but they do not really mean it. The truth is a weapon. It is sharp and cold and indifferent to your pain. When I first saw that video feed of her walking in the kitchen, it felt like a physical blow to the chest. It would have been so much easier to close the phone. It would have been easier to drive away and pretend I never saw it. To keep living in the fantasy where I was the hero and she was the tragic beauty. But living in a comfortable lie is like sleeping in a burning house. It feels warm for a little while, but eventually the roof is going to collapse and bury you. They say the truth will set you free, but they forget to mention that first it will make you miserable. It will tear apart your reality. It will cost you friends, and it will break your heart. But it is the only path to air. I am standing in the ashes of my old life now, and for the first time in a decade, I can actually breathe. I am no longer waking up with a knot of anxiety in my stomach. I am no longer apologizing for things I did not do. I am bruised, yes. I am cynical, perhaps, but I am free. I learned that you cannot build a life on a sinkhole, no matter how pretty the house looks on the surface. I will trust again one day, because living without trust is no life at all. But next time I will check the blueprints. I will make sure the foundation is real. Because while the truth can destroy everything you thought you knew, it is also the only thing that can save your soul. And standing here today, owning my story, I have never felt more alive. I stood before the full-length mirror in the hallway of the house I had reclaimed. The glass used to show me a ghost. It used to reflect a man with hollow eyes and slumped shoulders, a man who looked 20 years older than his age. It reflected a husband who was slowly being erased by guilt and exhaustion. But today, the glass showed me someone else. I reached up and adjusted the knot of my silk tie, pulling it tight against my collar. My hands were steady. There was no tremor, no hesitation. The man staring back at me stood tall. His shoulders were squared and his eyes were clear, sharp, and filled with a quiet intensity. This was not the victim who had been played for a fool. This was the survivor who had played the game and won. It is strange how much can change when you finally decide to open your eyes. For 6 years, I walked through this house like a prisoner in my own kingdom. I tiptoed past the bedroom door, afraid to wake the invalid. I starved myself to pay for medicine that was flushed down the toilet. I mourned a tragedy that was actually a comedy scripted by 2 sociopaths. I let a predator live in my sanctuary. I fed her, I clothed her, and I protected her while she sharpened her fangs and waited for the right moment to strike. I thought I was carrying a cross, but I was actually digging my own grave. We all want to believe in the fairy tale. We want to believe that the vows we take mean something and that the people we love have our best interests at heart. It is a beautiful, comforting thought. But I am here to tell you that sometimes love is just a blindfold. We ignore the red flags because they are uncomfortable. We make excuses for the unexplained withdrawals and the whispered phone calls and the coldness in their eyes because the alternative is too painful to face. I paid a high price for my blindness. It cost me my fortune, my time, and almost my life. But I was lucky. I woke up before the brake lines were cut. I woke up before the final act. Now I am rebuilding. I have my work. I have a new chance at love with a woman who values truth. And I have this face in the mirror that I can finally respect again. But I did not tell you this story just to entertain you. I told you this so you would look at your own life a little closer. We think we know the people we share our beds with. We think we know their hearts. But secrets are heavy things, and some people are masters at hiding the weight. I smoothed down the lapels of my jacket and gave my reflection one last nod. The nightmare is over and the sun is finally shining. I am Bill Foster, and I survived keeping a poisonous snake in my house for 6 years. I walked through the fire and I came out the other side. But I leave you with one question, a question you might want to ask yourself when the lights go out. As for you, are you sure the person lying next to you tonight is really asleep? This story serves as a brutal reminder that blind devotion can be a dangerous weakness. We often confuse suffering with nobility, thinking that the more we sacrifice, the more we love. But that is a lie predators use to control us. Real love builds you up. It does not demand that you set yourself on fire just to keep someone else warm. You must trust your instincts more than your guilt. If something feels wrong in your relationship, do not ignore it. You are the guardian of your own life, and you have every right to demand the truth. If you enjoyed seeing karma finally catch up to those who deserved it, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories of justice and redemption.